And right now, I will call up the distinguished Avi Gilboa, a lieutenant serving in the Air Force and a lone soldier, who will introduce Saul.
Good evening. Saul Singer is the co-author of the best-selling book Startup Nation, The Story of Israel's Economic Miracle. He's the former editorial page editor and columnist at the Jerusalem Post. Tom Brokaw called Startup Nation a playbook for every CEO who wants to develop the next generation of corporate leaders. The book has reached number 5 on the New York Times and Wall Street Journal business bestseller lists, and is also the bestseller in Israel, India, and Singapore. The book has sparked reactions as diverse as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declaring, "We are the startup nation," to CNN, Fareed Zakaria calling it a book every single Arab businessman, Arab bureaucrat, and Arab politician should read. Citing Startup Nation, The Economist proclaimed, "Over the past 2 decades, Israel has been transformed from a semi-socialist backwater into a high-tech superpower." Singer is currently an adjunct senior fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute in Jerusalem, and a columnist and editorial board member at the Times of Israel. He also serves on the advisory boards of Vintage Investment Partners, an Israeli fund of funds, and Tevel B'Tzedek, an Israeli NGO working in Nepal and Haiti. In addition to the Jerusalem Post, Singer has written for the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, CNN Opinion, and other publications. Before moving to Israel in 1994, he served for 10 years as an advisor to different members of Congress and on the staffs of the House Foreign Affairs and Senate Banking Committees. Startup Nation is dedicated in part to Singer's brother, Alex Singer, who fell in battle while serving in the IDF, and whose writings and art are collected in the book Alex, Building a Life. Singer lives in Jerusalem with his wife and 3 children. Alex Singer.
Hello. So I'm here actually representing 2 books tonight. Startup Nation, that I wrote with Dan Seymour, was actually my brother-in-law. We don't mention that in the book, but it's not a secret. And the book, Alex, Building a Life. And the art that you'll see at the back of the room is on exhibit here. And Alex, of course, was a lone soldier, as was my other brothers, Daniel and Benji. So I have, I think, some appreciation for the need of this group and the important work that this group is doing. But I want to talk about Startup Nation and how we ended up writing the book. I'll give you just a story from the book and then tie it in also to the issue of soldiers, because there's a lot in the book about the Israeli military, and it's actually a book that I hope that anyone in the military will read to give them some appreciation of what they're doing. We call it Startup Nation because Israel has more startups than anywhere outside of Silicon Valley. These startups get something like 2.5 times as much venture capital as the United States on average per capita, and 30 times as much as Europe. And this is really the reason why the book, to our surprise, started getting translated into 23 different languages around the world. And I've been traveling around the world talking about the book, and basically what they want to know is, what is our secret sauce? How did we do it? That's why we wanted to write the book in the first place, to explain this phenomenon that had never really been explained and wasn't really noticed through all the coverage of the conflict and everything else. And the best way to understand it really is through stories. And we tell many stories in the book. I'll just tell you one short one. And that's about a guy named Scott Thompson, who was head of a company called PayPal. And the main investor in PayPal was something called Benchmark, a venture capital fund, one of the many looking around for startups here. And Benchmark was also involved with eBay, which bought PayPal, and so they went to Scott Thompson to get his view about a tiny startup here called Fraud Sciences. It was started to deal with the problem of credit card fraud. And they asked Scott Thompson, busy, big executive, to meet with a young Israeli guy named Shvat Shaked, who was then head of Fraud Sciences. And so Thompson is meeting with the young Israeli and asks him, so what is your big secret for beating credit card fraud? And Shvat says, well, I was in the military like most Israelis, and our job was to track terrorists over the internet. And we had this idea that terrorists and other bad people probably don't leave a lot of traces of themselves on the internet. And good people, normal people, they leave usernames and passwords and all kinds of stuff. They're not trying to hide anything. So you look for that stuff, you've got good people. If you don't find stuff, you've got bad people, and you've solved the problem. So now Scott Thompson is thinking to himself, I can't believe I'm sitting here listening to this kid talking about good people and bad people and terrorists. What does this have to do with my business? But he has to humor him, so he thinks, okay, how did you do with this scheme of yours? And Shvat Shaked says, well, we've been at it for 5 years and we did 40,000 transactions and we only got 4 wrong. So this is sort of interesting, but still not relevant for a company the size of PayPal. So then Scott Thompson gets a brilliant idea. Says, I'll give you 100,000 transactions that PayPal actually processed, real data on real people. You take this home and see what you can do with it. And he figures he's never going to see this kid again. This is more than twice what took him 5 years to process. So the young Israeli goes home. A few days later, Scott Thompson gets a 2-word email. We're done. They've gone through all the data, automated their process somehow over the weekend, sent it back to Scott Thompson. Thompson gives it to his top 50 PhD engineers in the company. They're pouring through it. It takes them about a week. They still don't know for sure, but they get the idea that on the transactions that PayPal had the most trouble with, Fraud Sciences had done 17% better. So this was, of course, a game changer for a company like this. Scott Thompson said he thought PayPal, which was the cutting edge of the industry, wouldn't have been able to do this in 5 years. So he goes running to Meg Whitman, who was then head of eBay, and says, we can't let Benchmark invest in this company. We can't let anyone invest. We have to buy this company. So they quickly make an offer of $80 million and negotiate for a few days, and they agree on $286 million. And it's a good negotiation. And the next thing you know is Scott Thompson is on his way to Israel, a country he'd never thought about before, certainly never been to see the company that he bought. And he shows up at the parking lot of Fraud Sciences, and he sees already there's something like 50 cars there, and they all have PayPal bumper stickers on them already. They're very excited to be part of the new company, and he speaks to the whole group, a group smaller than this, and then he opens it for questions, and he's expecting questions like, well, you just bought us, how is this going to work? They're merging our two companies. Nothing like that. Well, he starts getting questions like, why do you do it this way? Why not that way? Why is PayPal structured like this? What's wrong with your business model? All these tough questions about how PayPal is built. And he's beginning to get a little nervous up there. He's thinking, I thought I bought this company. It's like they bought me. So basically what you see here is a lot of things about Israelis that we know. We don't have a lot of respect for authority. We like to debate, we like to challenge, we like to ask questions. And the whole idea, basically a few young guys in their 20s decide they've got a better idea for beating credit card fraud. Doesn't matter that there are tens of thousands of people doing it one way with banks and credit card companies, pouring through credit card histories. That's how it was done. They came up with a different way. They thought, well, okay, ours is going to be better and everyone's going to take our way. So this is the way startups think. And of course, in this particular case, there's a military side to the story. But actually, we would argue that this kind of thing where an idea that came from the military was kind of adapted to a civilian or a commercial context, that happens, but it's not really the most common thing part of the story. And it's not actually the most important influence the military has had on what makes Israel entrepreneurial. I think to understand that, you have to think about innovation itself. And there's really a lesson from Israel about innovation. And that is that most people think that innovation is about ideas. And you can see that because if you plug the word innovation into Google Images, you do a search for pictures about innovation, you'll get lots of pictures of light bulbs. You know, light bulbs are the symbol of the idea. So this shows that we think of innovation as ideas. But it's not really ideas because, you know, there are lots of great ideas in the world. If you look at the numbers of patents, which are good, probably metric for ideas, let's say Israel is one of the top 10 countries in patents per capita. But what about the other 9 countries? They're not producing nearly as many startups as Israel. They're getting as many patents, many light bulbs are going off, but they're not getting the same number of startups, of innovations, and companies coming from these ideas. So we think that Israel has more of 2 other ingredients that you need to add to the idea. One is a lot of drive and determination. Sometimes you call it chutzpah. And the other is a willingness to take risks. And where does Israel get those 2 extra ingredients? I mean, that really is what most of the book is about. And that's what the story is, and many other stories we told in the book are about. And a lot of that comes from the military. I mean, one big factor is the fact that the whole country is a startup. It took a lot of drive and determination for there to be a country, Israel. It started from an idea. It took a lot of drive and willingness to take risks, not just 100 years ago or 60 years ago, but continuously. But I would say that the military is the next biggest factor. And not because of certain units that you know about, Shmona Battalion, the 8200 unit, or the Air Force. It's not just about the units that have a lot of tech in them. I mean, we talk about those units in the book, and they're very interesting, and it's certainly a big part of the story. But the more important thing, we think, is that in the military, people get things like leadership, teamwork, sacrifice. The whole idea that there's something larger than yourself that you need to make sacrifices for. Sometimes the ultimate sacrifice. And probably most important for entrepreneurship is the idea of the mission. The most important thing you're learning in the military is what a mission is. It's not how to shoot a tank or a gun or the high tech or whatever. It's what a mission is. Because a mission is something that you have to get done. You have to succeed, but on the other hand, you have to take risks. You can't fail, but you have to take risks. How do you square those things? And Israelis get this in the military. And most people, you know, it's the third experience in Israeli society. Most places there's school and there's work. In Israel, there's school and there's army and the work. And people get in the army things they don't get in those other 2 parts of life. And so this is why the book is out in Hebrew. And I know a lot of people in the high-tech world have read it in English before it came out in Hebrew. But I kind of wish that more Israelis would read it, particularly Israelis in the army, because I'm not sure that everyone realizes how important what they're learning, the kind of skills, the kind of values that they're learning in the army are important for the rest of their life, and have been such a huge part of what makes this country the startup nation. I want to say something though about the other book I'm representing here, Alex Building a Life. But this is a book that wasn't written on purpose. It is It is the letters, diaries, and art of my brother Alex that we collected after he was killed in September 1987. And we actually had no idea how much Alex was writing until we started collecting his writings. We all received our own letters from him. We didn't know about all the letters he was writing everybody else. And we actually knew about his diaries because Alex was the kind of guy who would show his diaries to people. They weren't so private. So what we did is when he was killed, we collected all this and edited it and basically created it as is, as a book, a little bit like Yoni's letters, Yoni Netanyahu's letters. I urge you to read it, first of all, because a lot of people, in fact, maybe most people who read it, they say that it really affects them and it can change their life. I would say more than Startup Nation. It's particularly, I think, important for you to read it if you're in the Army, because there are very few kind of real-time written experiences, written records of what it's like to go through the Israeli military, to go through paratroop training, to go through the decision of whether to become an officer, whether to sign on, and before that, for Alex, the decision to move to Israel, all that. All this kind of decision-making process, I think, really speaks to people who are in the military or of that age, because that's when he was going through it. So I urge you to get that book and read that book. And I'm happy to, there's so much more to talk about, but if we could just take a couple questions, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah.
What made you start researching and what made you write this book, Startup Nation?
So the idea for the book came from Dan, and he kind of got the idea originally when he was at Harvard Business School in 2001, and he brought the first mission of Harvard Business School students to Israel, a very international group, most of them not Jewish, from all over the world. And they were amazed at what they were seeing, and he wanted to be able to hand them a book to explain what they were seeing, and there wasn't one. So we were surprised that there wasn't one. We couldn't find one in English or in Hebrew, and so it took us a while, but we decided to write it. But you know, we just felt that there was a story that was worth telling that hadn't been told. And to me, what's exciting about this, and this is another reason I think Israelis actually need to read the book, is because we don't appreciate our own strengths. And this is actually not just us. I find actually everywhere I go, people don't appreciate their own strengths. But it's certainly true here as well. And you see this because we constantly, particularly in the high-tech world, we complain. We basically say, oh yeah, we're great at startups, but why can't we build big companies? And you know, why do we exit so quickly? And why this and why that? And meanwhile, I travel everywhere else, and they're saying, you know, they don't say, why can we only do big companies? They don't even mention that. That's just like part of, that's obvious to them that they have big companies. But they keep saying, why don't we have startups? Why can't we do startups? And so I don't think we really realize as a country what it means to be Startup Nation. We have no idea that there are people from all over the world, countries, governments, that are desperate to build an innovation sector like we have. And I think this is our great opportunity going forward, because we are temporarily ahead of other countries in the kind of size and some ways sophistication of our innovation ecosystem. That's temporary. There are going to be more more collections of startups like Israel popping up in Africa, in Asia, in South America. And I think our great opportunity is to engage with them, to innovate with them, and by that help them come up as innovation sectors, but do it in a way that's integrated with us. I think that's our great opportunity as an economy, as a country, and if we do that, we change the world, we change our relationship to the rest of the world. But to do that, we have to understand that we are a startup nation. We have to understand how amazing it is what we have to offer and where it comes from. So, when we wrote the book, we were kind of trying to tell the story to a foreign audience. I realized after it came out how important it was to me that actually that Israelis read the book as well. Yeah.
What's the most interesting innovation you've come across in research?
The question was, what was the most interesting innovation? Well, one I use as an example a lot because it's so typical Israeli in terms of all the pieces of it. And I didn't bring it with me. I usually have one in my pocket. It's called a pill cam. And what it is it's the size of a large pill. And it's got two cameras in it, one facing one way, one facing the other. It's got a transmitter, a battery, a light source, and you swallow it. And it takes a movie as it's going through your body and beams out the movie to the doctor, who can be in the same room or the other side of the world, and detects cancer and other problems inside you. And this was invented by a guy who was working on miniature cameras for missiles and aircraft, and he thought, I can turn this into a pill. And it took him about 20 years, but he did it. And what makes this typical Israeli to me is how Israel is actually #1 in the world in medical device patents per capita. And I think that's because medical devices is perfect for us because it combines many different technologies at once. And that's one of the things we like to do. But there's so many, and one of the things that's remarkable about Israel is it's not tech in just one area. It's clean tech, it's agri-tech, it's nanotech, it's chips and phones and memory and even media, all kinds of things. Certainly medical, biotech. It's very, very wide range and changing all the time. Yeah.
With all the talk of the brain drain, over the course of the past few years, do you see the trend in startups growing or declining?
So, one of the things that happened in my travels was I went to Korea, and I just now went to Singapore. And one of the things that was surprising when I got to Korea is they said, we have an education crisis. And that, of course, is surprising to us because we always talk about our education crisis. And what's our education crisis? It's that our kids are scoring something like 30 ranks down below Korea and Singapore. And this is driving us nuts. Why are we doing so poorly on these math and science tests? And so I was kind of shocked when I got to Korea and they said, well, we have an education crisis. So what are you talking about? You're at the top of the charts. And they say, well, our kids, yeah, they do well in these tests, but they're not creative enough. They don't know how to ask questions or how to debate, how to challenge, how to innovate. And our daughter Noah is here, and she goes to school here in Jerusalem, and at her school, almost every year they have a delegation from Singapore that's trying to visit and just figure out what it is we're doing here. And so this is not to say that we don't have an education crisis. We do. We have an education crisis, but so do they. And in fact, even our world-class universities have an education crisis, I think. I think education is in crisis. It's in desperate need of radical reinvention. Actually, there's one startup here that I only found out about when I was in Brazil because there are 300,000 kids using their technology in Brazil. It's called Mind Lab. Nobody's heard of it here. And what they do is they teach strategic thinking, decision making, emotional intelligence, things like that through games. Radical stuff. And this is the kind of thing that we need to do to reinvent education. I hope that we do it here. That's how we need to solve our education crisis, is through innovation. We need to solve our own crisis in a way that we can export to the rest of the world. Yeah.
Given the education crisis that you just identified, the fact that 50% of kids go to school where the core subjects are not even taught, you had a tremendous uproar in immigration early on. You don't have the Western immigration. Do you think that innovation should be sustained?
Yeah, so actually the question mentioned immigration. Immigration is a huge factor. The fact that we're a country of immigrants is a huge factor in making us entrepreneurial, and now that we're getting less immigrants, is that a problem? I hope that we have other problems like that. For instance, I hope that our kids won't have to serve 3 years in the military in the future, and that we'll have the challenge of dealing with that in terms of staying startup nation. Basically, our whole story has been about overcoming adversity. And we don't want to always have to overcome adversity. We wish we eventually will have less adversity to overcome, but then we'll have the challenge. So what keeps us innovative? And I think, that's why I'm so focused on working with other innovation sectors around the world, because I think that's our opportunity, is that instead of like every other country does, thinking in silos, thinking every country has to do its own innovation sector and so on, nobody's actually doing it together with other countries, and that's a huge opportunity, and that will also that will allow us to grow as an economy. It'll also solve our talent problem, because even if we have the best education system you can imagine, if we're playing our cards right, we're going to run out of great people, because we're a small country. We don't have enough people. And the way to deal with that is to work with other countries, to work with great entrepreneurs and innovators in other countries, and combine forces. So this is part of where I think we need to go, regardless of how the circumstances change. So I'm told that was the last question. So thank you very much.